Maybe someone smarter than me can read into it much more than I could, but for me, it felt like a sneeze that never came. If there's one thing she isn't interested in, it's love. However, love is certainly interested in her. Wink, wink. I wanted to pick up Delectable Magic as a hangover cure for The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. Hello everybody, I am Rue and welcome to my channel, Rue with the Books. I am happy that you have stumbled across my Talking Books video. It means that you have an interest in books. So do I. Me and you, we might get along here. My Talking Books videos involve me discussing books that I have read since the last episode, books that I am currently reading, and books that I plan to read soon. As a quick aside, I am not going to do the TBR section for this Talking Books video because I have like a Halloween spooky season kind of vibe special that I'm going to do next week. So if you're excited for some horror picks, look forward to next week's video. I have some good ones planned. I promise. I hope you have a nice beveragino ready because it's time to talk about some books. What have I read? So, very good news, gang. I have finished all of the books that I had on the currently reading and the TBR section of my previous Talking Books video. So in that one, I had Klara and the Sun and Katabasis for the currently reading, and I had Delectable Magic and the Bee Sting on the TBR. And the Bee Sting I literally finished last night. So these are the books that I'm going to talk about mainly in this video, but I also did take out a book from the library, so there's a surprise pick for me in this video as well. So keep watching and find out what that is. Katabasis is a hot, new, dark academia novel by R.F Kuang. It is about a pair of graduate students who start as enemies and over the course of their journey into hell to save their genius, big brain, big noggin professor, start uniting and improving their relationship. A great comparison for this book is Piranesi meets Dante's Inferno. So if you like Piranesi and you find satanic mythology interesting, this is a pretty decent book to pick up. And that's what hooked me in, personally. So each circle of hell is interesting and presents its own challenges. I thought Kwang's depictions of hell to be somewhat creative as they leaned away from the kind of generic, typical pit of everlasting burning fire that we also love. Kuang flexes on the reader from time to time, writing absolutely gorgeous sentences to describe the setting or discuss a concept. And you can tell that she had a really, really fun time using her knowledge of being in academia to write this book because she has lots of references to mathematical things, like sciencey things, like old philosophers and authors and stuff like that. The magic system in this book was fantastic, and it intertwined with the dark academia aspects absolutely perfectly. So, how does it work? Well, this magic system is based on using paradoxes. So that we are all on the same page, I will define what a paradox is and give some examples and explain why this works so well in this book. Well, a paradox is an absurd or contradictory statement which, when investigated, may prove to be well-founded or true. One example of a paradox that comes up in this book is the Elias paradox. The Elias paradox states two things. Firstly, that the next statement is true, and secondly, that the first statement is false. This leads to the fact that neither of these statements can now be true or false, and so the paradox is born. A second paradox, and this one is from George Orwell's 1984, so a very different flavor, is the quote, "War is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength." This one is pretty obvious. Everything is defined by the opposite of what it is, and therefore it's all just completely wrong, and it's, the propaganda that the party repeats to all of its citizens. So to lead on to why the magic system worked for me, well, magic itself is pretty paradoxical. We see a magic trick in real life, and we are confused, we are disturbed, we are entertained. We have seen something that simply cannot be real. R.F Kuang has a lot of fun with this magic system, and you can see it as the reader. The magic system was one of my favorite aspects of this book. It played a good, strong role in the plot while not being the entire focus. The magic is able to do things like duplicate items, make everlasting objects, and trap people inside liminal spaces. So it's kind of like playing with the idea that it's kind of like abusing nature and doing things that shouldn't be possible. The plot wasn't super important in this book. It was far, far more about the journey and the various people that the characters meet, the events that occur, the roadblocks that stand in the way. All of these things were super, super interesting and kept me excited in the book and kept me wanting to read. I especially enjoyed some of the more relevant side characters, as they are inhabitants of hell, and they carry around a lot of intrigue and they have interesting stories to tell and things like that. The climax of this book was solid. I did find that it was very predictable, but it was sweet nevertheless and written pretty well. I had two main issues with the book. The first one was the pacing. I'd be getting interested in what was going on, and then all of a sudden I'm in the middle of Flashbang City. R.F. Kuang constantly delved into Alice's mind palace to give us flashbacks as to how Alice was wronged by her professor or the institution and things like that. I feel that shedding light on some of these topics is very important. So, topics such as sexism, feminism, things like that. But constantly going back and dragging me out of the story to keep giving me flashbacks and going on tangent after tangent was the wrong move. I felt that it sucked me out of the story far too frequently because it really just did happen so often. These flashbacks do feel very anecdotal, so it does feel quite realistic at times. Because some of the stories do feel a little bit exaggerated. Like maybe those experiences were typical like 40, 50 years ago in academia, but I think that we've moved on as a society a lot more in these days. So I found the more subtle examples of sexism to be like very believable, and it helped me empathize with women today. But I feel like she was a bit heavy-handed with it by, bringing up the same topics too much, and including examples that would have been relevant 50 years ago and not so much today. The second aspect that I think could have been a bit better was the amount of time we spent with Peter. R.F. Kuang wrote so much about Alice and her experiences and then crammed essentially a load of Peter stuff into just one chapter. And the chapter wasn't even that long. So a large focus on this book was their relationship, and the focus felt a bit one-sided because we didn't explore enough one of the major parties of this relationship. So, this book had a lot of exciting parts, but it was also a bit of a slog at times due to all the flashbacks. I did enjoy it though, and I'm glad I picked it up as it was my first R.F. Kuang read ever. If you would like to hear me talk more about this book, I will include a card somewhere. There, I don't know, but somewhere. Because I have done a full review on Katabasis, which will basically go over what I just said, but in a lot more detail. And I would have worked on that video a lot longer than just this section. So yeah, go check it out if you're interested. And overall, I rated this book 3 stars out of 5. Klara and the Sun was a very different book to what I typically read. It's about Klara, and Klara is an artificial friend. And what that means is that it's her job to essentially be a child's best friend. It starts off with Klara at an artificial friend shop where people come in, bring their kids, and they try find a companion for their child. And so at the start of this book, we see Clara's observations about people, humanity, and the planet, what things are like. And it's very interesting to inhabit Clara's head as someone that doesn't know about the world. And, she has a very fresh perspective and sees things a little bit differently. And upon a chance encounter, she sees Josie and they start up a conversation. And eventually, Josie's mother decides to buy Klara for Josie, and the rest of the book begins. Now, what I'm about to say, it might sound like an insult, but give me a minute, okay? While this book is very boring, it's also incredibly interesting. It's a paradox upon itself. The reason I say that it's boring is because not that much actually happens. There isn't much drama, not much excitement, and absolutely no action. The reason I say it's interesting, though, is that for me, this is a book that made me do a lot of thinking. Kazuo Ishiguro involves a lot of very modern aspects in the storytelling that let me reflect on the way that the world currently is, as well as where it's moving and how it's changing. I thought the subtle inclusions of how children are the first ones to adopt new technology, as well as how socializing has changed after the pandemic to be very nuanced and intelligent. There are a lot of little things like that you can pick up on and have a good think about. And those are just like, as I said, those are just a couple examples. There is so many things that you can fixate on and just let your mind wander from place to place to place. This book is quite short and it does a lot of things in that time span. If you're a plot focused reader, you got to give this book some time because the plot doesn't really present itself until about 50% of the way into the book. There aren't a lot of like hyper relevant characters, but the ones that Kazuo did spend a lot of time to write are all quite complex. There were some aspects in their storylines that I found incredibly shocking, and it was just absolutely surreal. Overall, I rated this one 4 stars out of 5. I really enjoyed it. It's short and sweet, and it does a lot more than the number of pages would actually suggest. So, this is my top secret NDA signed sleeper agent FBI library pick. I've seen this book around so many times at local bookshops and always thought it sounded really interesting, and I just kept thinking that the cover is absolutely gorgeous. And well, it was my lucky day because the library had it sitting all nice and pretty on the shelves for me. This book is about Inji, a 29-year-old woman who works for Wedding and Life, and specifically their new marriage section. She's a contract wife, which means if someone has enough money, they can contract a wife or husband to live with them and act as their spouse for a year, and that is what Inji does. There are many reasons that people would want to do this. To keep up their appearances if they are gay, um, or they had a divorce and they just want the physical like companionship associated with having a wife, and so they could contract one out. You get the idea. For Inji, it's all business. If there's one thing she isn't interested in, it's love. However, love is certainly interested in her. Wink, wink. I thought this book was interesting. Goodreads does suggest that it's a thriller, and while there are some thriller aspects, I don't think it's a massive focus. The thriller aspect could have been developed more, but the author chooses to sweep it to the side, and that's a shame because I do think that the thriller aspect was actually really, really disturbing and quite scary. But yeah, this book is more of a slice of life. It explores what life could be like for the contract wife and presents some characters that are involved in Inji's life. I think the character work in this book was quite good. This book is quite short, but the characters are quite nuanced. This book is very, very funny sometimes, and I was absolutely cracking the hell up when I was reading about the granny. She was like, she has her own like side story about like someone she's in love with, and it's just hilarious, but also a little bit sad. The main character is pretty mean and judgmental a lot of the time, and that could potentially be off-putting for some people. If you check the Goodreads reviews for this book, the rating will actually shock you. A lot of people complained about this book having a terrible translation. I think I'm a lot more tolerant than a lot of people, so it didn't bother me too much. But if that's something that is likely to really disturb your enjoyment of the book and get under your skin, then it's probably worth giving it a skip. Also, while this book isn't smutty, it does have a lot of sexual content, so that is something to be mindful of. It doesn't like paint that kind of thing as something like really glamorous or anything like that, more so that it's just an aspect of life, which it is. I enjoyed this book, but I don't feel that I learned like that much from it. I also feel like it was missing something to make it better. It could just be that, as I said, the thriller aspect was sidelined a bit too much, and I was quite enjoying that, so it should have been brought a bit more front and center. But oh well. I also might have just read a bit too many like really good books recently, so it might have just felt like a bit underwhelming in comparison to everything else. Either way, overall, I did rate this book 3 stars out of 5. So while there are things that it could have done better, it was still overall a good experience. I wanted to pick up Delectable Magic as a hangover cure for The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. That plan didn't quite work out for 2 reasons. First of all, I ended up reading multiple books in between, and second of all, I binged this book in about a day because I ended up traveling and had nothing better to do. If you want like a kind of palate cleanser book, typically you want to kind of stay on it for more than a day, so we can actually take the necessary time to cleanse the palate. I won't talk too much about what happens in this book because it is book 5 in a series, but I will talk about what the series is about and give my thoughts about this book in general and how it compares to the other books in the series that I've read so far. So, Myrtlewood Mysteries centers around a mother and daughter power duo, and their names are Rosemary and Athena. After Granny Thorne's death, Rosemary comes to Myrtlewood, where Granny Thorne lived, and finds out that she has an inheritance. Good old Granny Thorne looking after her grandchildren, eh? Granny Thorne's magical house and everything within it is the inheritance, and thus their new life in a magical town begins. It's based in England, but it is a magical town with magical residents of all kinds of races. There are vampires, werewolves, fairies, humans, and all sorts, really. You get to know everybody worth knowing in this town as you read the series. It feels like so cozy. It's like cozy overload. It's like having the warmest, comfiest, nicest blanket just all over you, and you're tucked in. And perfect. So Rosemary has a new elderly BFF in this town who will do like anything for her, and that adds to the cozy vibes. Rosemary is the most powerful witch in this town and has people relying on her for all sorts of things, sorting out all sorts of magical maladies. You get all the great aspects of a series like Legends and Lattes, but tagging on a lot more drama and excitement while also still being low stakes and maintaining that cozy aesthetic. In each book, some big issue comes up that threatens Rosemary, Athena, and the residents of the town, and it's up to our duo to investigate, put the pieces together, and resolve whatever the issue is. These mysteries that pop up are usually very interesting and exciting and get you hooked, and that's one aspect of why the series is so great. There is continuity where you follow Athena and Rosemary and their powers progress, they learn new things, and they grow as people. So there is some kind of overall overarching progression, but at the same time, each book has a new mystery that keeps you hooked and kind of occupies a lot of space and keeps you intrigued while all the other nice stuff is going on around it. Without spoiling what the mystery of this book is about, I want to talk about the good and the bad. The relentless pacing is for the most part good because it's so fast paced you just keep wanting to read, but I do feel like Iris Beaglehole just wanted to get this book out as fast as possible and didn't pause and ruminate on the most interesting parts of the book and flesh them out as much as she could have. The mystery in this book is interesting, but I think so far, out of all of the other books that I've read in the series, it is the weakest. And that's including the climax, which is, the part that everything builds up towards. It was the weakest in the series. The climax in the last few books was built up really, really well, and we got a few chapters with like really high stakes. Well, not really high stakes, but with some stakes where things are, ooh, could go this way, could go that way, keeps you on your toes. But in this one, the build-up wasn't as exciting. And it was over just a bit too quickly for me. With how quickly it all kind of fizzled out, I didn't feel like it was. I was as interested with the outcome, and it wasn't like as bizarre or creative as the other ones. With that being said, I did still really enjoy this book. It is a bit of a trend in this video, but once again, I rated it 3 stars out of 5. And I definitely will go back for more. Book 6, I don't know when I plan to read it, but I certainly will. This book is an absolute behemoth. It's about a family who is incredibly dysfunctional after certain circumstances. The father starts building a bunker. The mother starts selling off old possessions for money. The daughter turns to drinking while she should be studying for exams, and the son is planning to run away. They are all doing very different things, and they don't communally spend a lot of time together. I feel so incredibly polarized with this book. It had a lot of really, really good aspects, but also so many things that just dragged it down for me. I'll start with the good before I get to the bad. Paul Murray's character work in this book is absolutely phenomenal. The characters in this book are some of the most complex, difficult, layered, and interesting characters I have ever read about in any book. And that's just looking at the family members who are our main 4. A lot of these secondary characters get their moments to shine too, and not always in a good way. There are a lot of hateable characters in this book, and a lot of reasons to basically hate any character. I think the only character that practically did nothing wrong, really, kind of, in this book was the son. The writing in this book was also fantastic. And by that, I mean the way that he describes scenes, the way that he just beautifully strings together words, the way that he describes thoughts in our characters' heads. They are at times really beautiful, at times really, really poetic. If you like to read a paragraph and be enamored by the way that someone paints the world to be such a beautiful place to live in and to see the beauty in everything, then this book has some absolutely incredible sections for you to delve into. Sometimes I would start a new chapter, read the first few lines, and stop to think about how beautiful and poetic what he just wrote was. It's easy to see that Paul Murray generally does have an incredibly big talent for writing. The storylines in this book are incredibly gripping. Learning about Dickie's brother and what happened to him and how that was tied into Imelda's storyline, who is the mother, by the way. Exploring Cass's friendship with Elaine and how it's kind of quite toxic for her is interesting. And the storyline with PJ talking to someone online that he has never met and what happens with that. All of these fragmented aspects are super interesting, and it's also nice because it shows the divide in the family because they're all doing very different things. And like, for example, no one really knows about what each other's doing. The father building his bunker, that is quite known because he's got someone in the house, but like what Imelda's doing, what PJ's doing, Cass's life, no one knows between each other what they're doing. Um, so that kind of lends to the dysfunctional aspect of the family. Um, Paul Murray does spend a lot of time fleshing out these characters and these storylines. So as they progress and build towards the climax, it's really interesting. You feel super, super hooked. And hopefully for you, the climax should be worth it. Everything that the book builds up towards is resolved in the final 5%. That final 5% was incredibly, incredibly exciting, and my eyes would not leave the page, the screen. We even started getting POVs from characters we didn't have any POVs from, but they were relevant to the story. The ending is ambiguous though, and a lot of people do hate that, but I think it's fairly easy to grasp and read. Usually, the saying is between the lines, but in this case, it's after the lines because we have to think about things that weren't said, weren't written, and figure it out. And now, on to the bad. First of all, I didn't really like the pacing of the book. The book starts off with multiple, several hour-long chapters, and this is a personal gripe. I'm sure there's a lot of people don't mind because they like getting lost in a long chapter, but I don't really have the focus for that. Then about halfway into the book, Paul Murray switches it up and starts writing 5 to 15-minute chapters, just one after another, quick fire like that. He must have realized that the book was a slog, and rather than going back and fixing what he already had, he did a complete 180 and changed the style. Secondly, and this lends itself to my first point, Imelda, her chapters have no full stops. I get that authors can choose what stylistic choices they want, but that doesn't mean that I'll always like them. Imagine reading a 2 to 3 hour chapter with absolutely no full stops, and just think about how that could drive you mad. Yep, that literally happens in this book. Thirdly, the way that this book is written, it's just one massive stream of consciousness until you're about 95% in. I've not read a book like this before, and it's made me realize that maybe it's not exactly for me. I like when things are separated out and we go from one coherent thought to another coherent thought, so it's easy to follow. It is quite smart from a literary perspective because we are inhabiting these characters as brains, and when we start dissociating and thinking random things, our thoughts are jumbled up kind of in the same way that Paul Murray's writing style in this book is. However, once again, just because an author gets to choose a literary device or a stylistic choice, it doesn't mean that I have to be a fan of it, because it meant that I had to really, really, really focus to get what was going on at times. A lot of these things that I just complained about might not be massive cons to people, but for me, they really, really lessened my enjoyment of the book, despite how literarily impressive it is. After all, enjoyment is the most important aspect. If you're not enjoying it, it doesn't matter how impressive or beautiful or technical it can be, it is still going to drag on and you're just going to want to get to that final page. So, overall, I rate it 3 stars out of 5. Currently reading. I have a bit of time until I want to start reading my spooky season books, and so I decided to pick up a bit more of my good mate Terry Pratchett. It's time to pick up where I left off with the City Watch subseries and to dive into Feet of Clay. This one has a werewolf in, so it's practically spooky season adjacent anyway. If you don't know what the Discworld series is, it's basically a series set in a world that is a disc on the back of a giant turtle gliding through space. It's a series of satires and comedies on various things with characters that are memorable because they are incredibly funny and great caricatures. So, for example, they all have their own quirks that make them absolutely lovable. If you haven't read the first 2 books in the City Watch subseries, don't worry, it literally doesn't matter. All of these books are completely standalone. This book is set to follow Commander Vimes, a werewolf, a golem, and a dwarf. That sounds like the setup for a terrible joke. For those of us that have read these books before, that's just the Night Watch, and we absolutely love and adore these characters. So it's going to be a great time to delve back in and get some more laughs out of them. As to what happens in this book or what it's about, well, a crime has happened, and Vimes has to find out not just who done it, but how done it too. This sounds like it's going to be an incredibly fantastic time, and I cannot wait to get into it. I don't even know what the crime is yet, but I know I have to get to the bottom of it. So, that's the end of Talking Books number 5. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like books, or my voice, or me, or my videos, be sure to press that like button to spread me all viral like across the algorithm. I would appreciate it if while you were down there, you press the subscribe button too. I'm trying to build a cozy little community to talk about books with. Have you read any of these books? If so, did you agree with my opinions? If not, did I convince you to read any of them? I would also love to hear about what you're currently reading, so chuck that down in the comments too for me, please. Anyway, until next time, Rue out.